So we're relying on Jake for all the tasting notes tonight. Is that what we're doing?
Yes, sir.
I remember what it tastes like. I'm just not going to be able to go too in depth.
I'll take your memory 1,000 times over Jake's current in his hand and his mouth.
You should have worked harder yesterday unloading that truck.
You took one frickin' hand truck load into the thing and then just stood outside. You did jack shit. And you're the only one that has a bottle somehow. You don't own the liquor store or the distillery, and yet you're the only one with a bottle. That doesn't make sense.
Sucks to suck. A podcast about bourbon and the ones who drink it. This is Bourbon Matters. Welcome to Bourbon Matters. I'm Jake.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Gold Eagle Jake.
And tonight we are talking about barrel number 1250 from Whiskey Acres, handpicked by Gold Eagle, that just came out on Friday.
Whoop whoop.
Yeah, and we're recording this before then, so me and Gold Eagle Jake don't have a glass in front of us because we haven't got ours yet, somehow.
Mine fell off the truck, so.
I was say, one must have fallen off a truck somewhere. And you have a
But
bottle.
of course, we have tasted this before. We might have had a major role in picking this. And it's got a cool story, so...
I don't sell you guys anything but cool story barrels at Whiskey Acres. Mm-hmm. Like I have good friendship with you. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's hand selected by Gold Eagle. It was hand selected by me, and Gold Eagle really liked it, and they decided they wanted it. So that
is fair.
I'll take some of that credit.
You can definitely say that. We still selected it. One of one. It had to be approved.
Hand-picked single barrel. That's Gold Eagle icon.
It doesn't say
it's not
handpicked by
Dan
Gold
Davis.
Eagle. It doesn't say handpicked by Gold Eagle. It says handpicked barrel number.
It's your sticker.
All right. Either way, we got a barrel. It's delicious. And Dan did some behind-the-scenes magic to get us that barrel. So where did this all start, Dan?
So this started, you can go back, I'm not sure what episode number it is, mainly because I don't listen to them. When we did our tasting event at Gold Eagle with Whiskey Acres, probably 3 or 4 months ago already now.
Yeah.
We did our top secret blind tasting where I didn't tell either Jake's what I was bringing. Gold Eagle Jake, I let him know I was going to bring 2 things that he had on his shelf that we could use for trying to make sales, because normally at distillery events, Jake likes to make sales from that distillery. So I wanted to give some things that were on the shelf, but then everything else was either stuff that people at the distillery have never tried or didn't even know we had. And just a quick rundown, everything started off blind. Everyone gave feedback. I collected the feedback, put all the information in. We started out with our normal bonded bourbon. Everything was right at 100 proof, or right around 100 proof, to make sure that all the proofs were equal. So we started off with our normal bib bourbon, and then we tried some 3.5-year-old whiskeys, one of which had a different strain of yeast from what was in our bib, one which was another strain of yeast that was completely different from the second sample. We tried a sample of the 3.5-year-old Oaxacan corn. We tried a sample of a almost 4-year 4-grain. We tried a sample of 3.5-year-old bourbon with rye in the mash bill instead of wheat. And then our 7-year bourbon, and then a special treat, which is an 8-year rye that has not ever been released or anything. So those were kind of the rundown. Some of the standouts. The top 2 places were taken by the 8-year rye, was the highest rated. Second highest rated was our 7-year bourbon. And then tied for third was the bourbon with rye mash bill, as well as the bourbon with a wheat mash bill, but with a yeast strain that we use called GW, that was switched to. So a 3.5-year-old GW and a 3.5-year-old bourbon with rye. each finished with a 7 out of 10 score, which when I left, I was really happy with. And some people think, well, 7 out of 10, well, C's get degrees. Yeah, that's right. That's for a 3.5-year-old bourbon. That's younger than what we ever released stuff at, except for rye. And we're pushing age limits up even farther. So if you stopped out at Gold Eagle over the weekend and got your Bloody Butcher, it's all 5-year bourbon this year. It's the first time our Bloody Butcher's been all 5 years. So we're pushing age statements up farther. So it was good to see our 3.5-year-old stuff was doing well. Now, obviously, I wanted to try and promote some of the things that Jake had on his shelf at Gold Eagle so he could make some sales. But then my other motives of going to these things is to try and sell Jake a barrel. And instead of inviting him out to the distillery, there's a barrel that I had tried a while ago that I really liked. And I knew it was a little bit unique. So I brought a sample of that barrel just to see if Jake liked it. And he liked it so much, he told me on spot that's the barrel he wanted. Didn't need to bring in anything tasting. We didn't need to try different proof points. Pretty happy with that. When you just bring a random sample to see if it's going to fly, and it knocked Jake's socks off. And then after he said he liked it, I then let him know that was a sample of the older brother to the 3.5-year-old bourbon with rye in the mash bill, with the yeast that everybody loved. This was a 5-year-old barrel with our GW yeast, as well as 15% rye instead of 15% wheat. And that is kind of how everything came around. This is the oldest we've done of bourbon with rye. There's only 5 total barrels that we produced that year. This is the first one that has ever seen the light of day, and something that most people or no one outside the distillery has tasted before I let Jake have a sample of it.
Yeah, so this is the first rye bourbon mash bill that's been released from Whiskey Acres.
Correct. And one of the first with I believe the first was GW yeast as well, which was the favorite yeast strand that everyone tried. And one of the take homes and one of the questions I had got asked that I won't forget is, when is our 7-year-old bourbon with a GW coming out? Which I said it'll be another 3.5 years. But people were able to start to see how the flavor changes at 7 years with the bourbon, as well as that yeast that they really liked. But this is a 75% corn, 15% rye, 10% malt barley. Barrel proof was 117 points. Was it like 4 or 8 or something?
4.
Yeah, 4.
So it was bottled. We did if you listen to it now, we had just completed Friday. I went out to Gold Eagle to promote and taste out that, as well as the Bloody Butcher and some other things. So thank you to everyone that came out. But that's my side of the story, I guess. Jake, you want to kind of explain it from your point of view and some of the things that you thought of?
Well, first off, lots of moving pieces there and lots of impressive stats, right? First barrel it's got to be the first single thing to be released with the GW strain, because you haven't been using it for that long, right? So even if it's been released before, it's probably blended with the old stuff too.
Yeah, because we have some 4-year bourbon with it. I don't know for sure if we've had a bourbon with GW go out. I know that I picked a pretty young barrel for my distiller's pick that's at the distillery now, and that's not GW, but I know it's right around when we switched over to GW. So I don't know if someone's taken a younger barrel than me before.
Yeah, and I guess the biggest takeaway from this GW is it totally changes the entire nose and flavor profile of the Whiskey Acres product. And not to say that it was bad before and now it's good, but it's just much different. And I think the original yeast strain kind of showcased a lot of the grain. And when people nosed and tasted Whiskey Acres, they are usually, it's impressive how many people are able to identify it. Now, again, those are probably big. I know they are big Whiskey Acres fans, so they can kind of pick it out right away. But it had kind of like a distinct flavor profile that was intended to showcase the grains. With this new GW yeast, first off, it tastes much more mature than 5 years, this barrel pick. I mean,
Yeah.
if you put it blind next to the 7-year, I kind of want to say I would think the GW 5-year is older.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's a very sneaky high proof. I think it tastes like 95 to 100 proof. There's almost no ethanol, no burn there. It's very well rounded, very balanced. It's got a really long finish. I think we all pointed that out last night when we were all
Mm-hmm.
tasting it. It just kept going on and on. And yeah, I mean, uh, Jake, you're drinking it right now. What are you tasting on it?
Yeah. I think you nailed it. Like that kind of corn forward ethanol note that's kind of standard in the Whiskey Acres products is a lot more subdued on this. It's definitely much more in the like vanilla caramel and maybe even like Coca-Cola or like cherry Coke kind of area of flavors. The rye definitely comes through a little bit. Adds a lot of baking spice. There's some cinnamon. There's oh god, I'm so bad with the baking spice notes.
I mean, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good list of tasting notes there. But
But
going back
yeah,
to the, go ahead.
it's much more I'd say complex, and I think a couple things are driving that. I think the age in part and the yeast are doing a lot of the lifting on this.
But it's only a 5-year, and
Yeah,
when we tasted the 3.5-year sample at the master class, nobody would have guessed that was 3.5 years.
no, yeah,
You
no,
you
not
could
at all.
tell
And
it wasn't a
I
well
mean,
aged bourbon, but nobody would guess it was only 3.5 years.
yeah, I mean, if you're
I mean,
watching
look
the
at the
video,
color.
you can see how dark this is for a 5-year. It's pretty impressive. I've
And
got
also,
I just
it's
happened to accidentally pour a Found North 18, and it's like the
oh
same
wow.
color. So, um, yeah, it's really impressive, and for being so dark, it's not really overtaken with like the wood notes either. So like, there's a really nice balance there.
And
Yeah,
it's
it's just
also worth
super well
noting
rounded.
that previous barrel picks we've done, I mean, we've done some really, really good picks with Whiskey Acres.
Mm-hmm.
The last one being the double toasted, which that was probably one of the most fun projects as far as our barrel picks have gone, where we tasted that barrel. We decided it was really impressive that it was the only toasted barrel and it was in the barrel for 7.5 years. And it was 132 proof, but it just tasted hot. There was something off about it. And so we decided to go ahead and try that at different proof points and pick the right proof for it to be bottled at. And it was a night and day game changer. I mean, that barrel is phenomenal at its 109 proof. But this one, right out of the gate, ready to go. As Dan mentioned, he brought me one sample and just poured it, and I think I was instantly sold. Didn't even know what it was, but you could just tell by my facial expression that we were buying that barrel.
Yeah, it's couple points you guys touched on with first off like the yeast. So obviously one of the things that we want as farmers, and one of the things we worked with Dave Pickerel on, was wanting to showcase the grain. But as we've gotten older and older as a distillery, we want to do that more with the different flavor profiles you get out of the different types of corn that we use. Popcorns, the Bloody Butchers, the Oaxacans, the Glass Gems, things like that. So we know that some people really like the corn forward, some people don't really like the corn forward. And the way the old yeast works, when it converts the sugar to alcohol, it does it super cleanly. And basically, then when you distill it, you have a very, very clean spirit, which doesn't alter the flavor much from the ingredients that were used in it. And wheat, you're going to get some soft breadier notes. The corn's going to use where you're going to get the corn forward notes from. With the GW, it doesn't transition into such a clean alcohol. It leaves it a little, this sounds bad, but for ease of trying to describe it, it leaves it kind of a little muddy. It allows it to have a little bit more flavor punch. Best way I can describe it as, think of like when you beer batter brats. Usually a skunkier beer for beer batter brats is going to be better because you're going to get some of that beer flavor to come out more than like a Bud Light or a Coors Light or something like that. That just it's like water with beer flavor. So you want something with that. We started experiments last year.
Is actually like contributing to the flavor profile.
Yeah.
Right.
And we've done things. If you're big beer people.
Oh, it definitely is.
Yeah. If you're big beer people, it's a lot different between what we make and what breweries make to get to a final product. We don't have to be as careful with everything, and sometimes we do add specific types of bacteria into our fermenters just to try and punch the flavor up a little bit too. We started experimenting with that last year, and you can smell a difference coming off the still. So by using a different type of yeast that's not as clean, you're going to lose some of those corn forward notes, and you're going to get a little more punch to it. For example, when we did the tasting with the different yeasts, one of the strains we tried was GW, the other was XP. XP is punchier and gives it more flavor, but it didn't rate nearly as high as the GW. There's actually about 0.7 of our voting percentage off on that. So that's what the yeast is doing.
PX a little
the
bit
XP?
because it was, or
The
XP because it was pretty interesting.
Yeah. It gives it a very interesting note. Now, we have a lot of both. We have way more GW, and when we start blending, maybe we blend in some XP. We'll probably start blending some XP in with a GW in small amounts just to give it a little bit extra punch. But it's going to get a little bit away from the corn-flavored notes. Obviously, with the rye added in, you're going to get some of that rye spice. You're going to get some of that pepper. That's also going to help to mask a little bit of that corn. You're still going to get a little bit of corn on the nose. Flavor profile wise, you're not really going to notice it. The yeast and the rye are both working to kind of fight through that. So if you haven't been a fan of our previous flavor profile, which that's fine. I'm never going to say one thing or the other against it. There's a bunch of whiskeys out there for reasons. But this is something that's completely different. We found out, like, if you go to our 7-year with some 8-year-old bourbon in it tastes phenomenal, because we find out that at about 7 years with the way we were doing things, that's when some of the barrel starts to take over and you get some of the more of the barrel notes of it. And that draws away from the corn forward notes of it that some people don't like. And I think that's why the 7-year has done so well.
Yeah.
But this rye is kind of doing the same thing, but at a younger stage. And that's not the barrel stripping away some of the flavors that some people didn't enjoy. But it's the rye and the yeast that are taking over and giving it a completely different nose, completely different palate, pretty different finish as well too. So
yeah, I mean, I think you kind of nailed it. Like it, a lot of those like raw corn and like ethanol notes aren't really present here, but the sweetness is definitely there. Pretty heavy on the nose, but also on the palate. And then the finish is like all baking spice and that like rye profile. And you get a lot of the oak on the finish too. So like it's a very nicely balanced sip throughout the whole thing.
of course I hit it right on the head. I do this for a living. Jesus. Like, this is my job. Like, of course.
I'm just gonna say that you never say anything correct, even when you do from now on.
You're just mad because I'm always one of the right answers. Well, not always. Gold Eagle Jake has some right answers too. You're never right. You're never right is a better way.
Taking clips of you out of context saying incorrect things, and that's what we're going to post as our reels.
That's going to be our final episode of the year.
Yeah.
April Fool's episode.
I'm going to get Kamala's fact checking team on our Instagram. No, it just shows the evolution of distilleries. I mean, we're still, our oldest barrel turns 10 this February. So 5 years in, we got a pretty good idea of what it's coming out as and what the normal is tasting like. And we have Rob, who's been there for a few years at this point. And then so the second 5 years, Rob's been established in his role and has got 2 years of distilling experience under his belt, and he got his master's degree at this point. So now we're starting to make tweaks and trying to find different things. But when part of my other part of my job is just to randomly walk around and drink whiskey at work. And one day I saw this barrel that said bourbon with rye, and I said, this one needs to be checked out. And I really liked it. So I got the story on it, and I just kind of remembered that. And I knew it was getting close to 5 years. I talked to the guys, and I said, hey, can I take this as a sample to Gold Eagle? And they said, yeah, have good luck. See how it goes. Jake, you also poured that for a couple people that lingered around afterwards, and they all seemed to be pretty impressed with it. That's good to see. But even just last night, like, even though you've tried it, you knew you liked it. After the master class with Bladnock, when we opened a bottle and you took your sip, like, it was impressive. And me and Rob talked about it on the way home. Our master distiller talked about it on the way home. It's like, it's good to see someone that, they tried it once and then they try it again and they're just really happy with it. I guess the biggest thing I would say about our bourbon with rye that has nothing to do with tasting notes really at all, I think, if you were there and you tried them when I was pouring samples, I think our 7-year and the 5-year bourbon with rye is about as Kentucky-style flavor profile as you can get. I know, Jake, you'll always put our stuff in blinds every once in a while. I'm excited to see how it does because we've knocked off Booker's with one of your barrel picks. We almost beat Weller Foolproof with one of your barrel picks. I'm excited to see how that does in blinds, but the same with the 7-year, just because I think people that say good bourbon can only come from Kentucky, I think they would bite their tongue if they say that, and then they try this and think it's Kentucky, and then they find out it's just DeKalb, Illinois.
Yeah, so. I mean, it definitely tastes like it could be from Kentucky, and I don't even like saying that just because I don't want
bullshit.
to. Yeah, it is bullshit. I don't want to portray to people that good bourbon has to be made in Kentucky.
That's the mindset. You got to play to the mindset.
Yeah, some people have that mindset, sure, but I would hope that most of our listeners by now understand that there's a lot of really good bourbon being made all over the U.S., but going back to the sample, I was definitely blown away when we tried it last night. And I thought it tasted really good when we first tried it, but it tasted better than I remember last night. And that's probably also to do with the fact that we left it in the barrel for 3 more months at least.
Yeah.
And it was at the end of a pretty hot summer. So it got a lot more interaction with the oak in those last 3 months. And yeah, I mean, I'm happy with this one. Hopefully it's sold out by the time this podcast episode airs, but if it's not, definitely don't sleep on this one. Make sure you at least try it before the bottles are gone. But I think this whole conversation kind of made to kind of switch it up a little bit, just think about yeast and how no distilleries and there's a couple distilleries that talk about yeast. Four Roses, Bullet with the 2 different mash bills, 5 different yeast strains, and then Wilderness Trail because they started the Firm Pro Solutions. They list their yeast, but I think it is interesting how nobody really ever talks about yeast, and all the talk is really about mash bills when it comes to recipes and distilling. And it's worth arguing. I mean, Dan, you know more than I do that yeast makes just as big, if not a bigger, impact on the taste than the mash bill and what grains you're using.
I mean, I think that was the best part of that masterclass that Dan did with the blind masterclass. Like, it was as much as I hate Dan getting to hit actually do his shit-eating grin and
This one right
give
here?
everybody some shit. But like,
This one?
yeah, the first three,
Yeah, the
yeah,
first three
first
would have been
three
all different
things we
yeast.
tried were the exact same mash bill with yeast differences, and I never would have guessed that it was the same percentages of grain in those three whiskeys. Like it was like night and day difference between all three of them. So like it's super cool when you get to actually see that. And I feel like you really only get to see that out of a craft distillery that's doing something at the scale that you guys are and experimenting the way you guys are right now.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, like, I obviously knew what was going to be happening, and no one had any idea. And so people are coming in with their preconceived notions of what they're going to be trying random things from Whiskey Acres. Is all that they knew. And obviously, everyone knows us for different corn varieties and things like that. So, with me knowing the first couple were our bib and then two different yeast strands that are different outside of our bonded bourbon, I asked some questions afterwards, and I had people vote whether they liked the first one or the second one, and people liked the second pour over the first pour. But the funny thing is, the overall grade was the exact same, even though a lot more people voted for the second sample over the first sample. And I said, all right. And I said, it's the same thing, but just a different yeast strain. And then I poured the third sample, and everyone did their tasting, wrote their notes down. I said, okay, raise your hand if you like the second sample or the third sample better. And the third sample was like 75% of the room.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, okay, anyone have any ideas what this is? And people just started saying different types of corn and things. And I said, okay, well, this is 75% yellow dent corn, just like the last one. 15% soft red winter wheat, just like the last one. 10% malted barley, just like the last one. They were barreled 2 days apart, and this is a different strand of yeast. And everyone thought it was a completely different sample,
Mm-hmm.
and all it was a swap out of a yeast. And then the next one we tried was a swap out of the grain, the corn. We switched to Oaxacan corn compared to the previous ones. And by this point, everyone had no idea what the hell was going on, because now people are thinking, well, is it another type of yeast? Is it a different mash bill? Is it a different thing? So I was trying to keep people thrown off. And then the way we did it, too, was we went our normal bib. We went a new type of yeast, another type of yeast. We swapped out the corn for a Oaxacan corn, and then we did a 4-grain, and then we did a bourbon with rye.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went to our older stuff. So it was set up to, and the Oaxacan used the GW yeast, the 4-grain used the GW yeast, and the bourbon with rye all used the GW yeast. So in the middle, there was a bunch of the same yeast, but mash bills changed, or the corn variety changed. And it was just designed to screw with people's heads and kept people off all night. I think Gold Eagle Jake was the only person that guessed one correctly. And he guessed the 8-year-old rye correctly and said he thinks this is an 8-year-old rye.
Did I really?
Yeah. You came up to me and you said, I think this is an 8-year-old rye. And I said, fuck.
No, I remember thinking it's an older rye. I just didn't remember specifically saying 8-year rye.
Yeah, you said 8-year rye.
I did not know
I
that was in the tasting.
This sample correct before, because Dan poured it for me before the master class, but he'll never admit that I guessed that it was a rye.
I didn't pour you that.
Bourbon.
Oh yeah, I did pour you that. No, I poured that for Jake, and then you would just do your thing where you just walk up and you're like, with an empty glass, and you're like, glass. I want
You're
things in my
supposed to be my
glass.
friend, so
That's misunderstanding.
But yeah,
I said, I'm pretty sure this is a bourbon with rye, and you were like, we'll see.
that tasting, it was very cool to get people's reactions on everything, but specifically I think it opened up a lot of people's eyes to yeast and how just the smallest tweak like that can make a difference. And it is kind of amazing that none of these, I mean, especially Wilderness Trail, they started the distillery because they already had Firm Pro Solutions,
Mm-hmm.
which is a yeast company that supplies a lot of the yeast to Kentucky distillers. You would think that they would come out with a line of bourbon to, with like 10 different yeast strains. This is the same mash bill, but all these different yeast. I bet you if Dave Pickerell went in there, he would say, play off of that. That's what you
Yeah.
guys are known for and good at. Four Roses had those tasting kits come out last year. They were like $130, and it came with a 50 ml of all 10 of their recipes. I think that's as close as you're going to get. There we go. Jake has one right there. Hopefully they do that again, because even though it is a little pricey, I do think that's a really cool experience to sit down and taste all those different recipes. And because they're all small batches, they're probably consistent in the flavor profile from each of those recipes. But yeah, that was a cool tasting to pick up on all those differences. And I don't know, yeast should be kind of talked about, and it's just one of those things where distilleries, especially the big ones, are kind of just stuck in their story about how they're using this ancient grandfather's yeast and can't change it.
Well, it's not as cool as talking about the mash bill.
Well, it's easy to explain mash bill.
It's not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can explain
that, right? It's easier
rye
to
makes
say.
this taste different
we
because of
change
this.
the
Wheat makes this.
percentages.
Yeah. It's, part of it is, and not just with them, but a lot of other, even just like large craft distilleries, your big producers. A lot of people don't talk about it because they want to have some types of secrets. Even just like they were talking about at Bladnock last night, is you can make everything the exact same way every single time. And every barrel is going to turn out differently, and you need to blend to get similar to what you're going for as possible every time. So even if people have our mash bill, they're not going to have our normal variety of yellow dent corn, which doesn't make a huge difference in flavor, but they're not distilling the same way we are. We're not making the same cuts as they are. They can use the same yeast. They can use yellow dent corn. They can use the same mash bill that we have, and it's going to come out completely different. And that's why do single barrels sell so well? Because I know Gold Eagle Jake always talks about it, is you have distillers that taste these different barrels when they're looking for blends, and they're like, well, this one's special. I'm going to put this aside for a single barrel pick. And I mean, we do that as well, and that's kind of what I did with this barrel. But it's, you find something unique, and you pull it aside for a single barrel selection, and that's why they taste so good, is because it's too good. Either Rob or me try something like this is too good to be blended into something normal. So
right, and it's like a single barrel really should blow you away. Like if it doesn't, it's not worthy of being a single barrel.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny when we talk about like single barrel picks and things like that, because at the distillery we always have a distiller's reserve available, which is a barrel picked by someone at the distillery. Rob will normally narrow it down to 4 barrels and give you 4 barrels. And I knew one of them that I was going to pick between was going to be the bourbon with rye, which was the sister barrel to what Jake had. And I didn't want to pick that one because I didn't want to have that come out at our distillery and you'd be able to get the same thing at 2 different places. I wanted that to stay special for Jake. Plus this other barrel I tried, I really liked. And I told Rob, I said, this one was trash. One of the samples was absolute trash. And, he goes, well, why? So I gave him what I thought of it. And he said, it's been turned down twice when you've said in this sample. So now we know that that's a blended barrel, right? Yeah. It's not like it was trash. It was just compared to the other ones. Like I tried it against the bourbon with rye that's the single barrel Gold Eagle pick. I tried it against another one that I really liked. And then I tried it against another one, which is fine, but just didn't blow me away. But again, besides the bourbon with rye, the other 3 were all within 8 months of each other. And they all tasted completely different.
Yeah. But I mean, that's like a good barrel compared to what should be single barrels is relatively trash. You know? And like, that's how it should be.
Yeah. It's not that it's trash. It's just, it doesn't stand out.
Right. Yeah.
When I say trash, it was I didn't like it compared to the other ones. It had some different flavors to it that I didn't enjoy. And that's fine because you blend it in. Because when you're making a normal for us bourbon or bonded bourbon, it's going to be 6-7 barrels in a blend. So And you want some of that stuff in there because it adds some flavor. It's diluted out a little bit by all the other flavors, but it adds a little bit more punch to the whiskey.
You do want some of that stuff in there.
Yeah, the only other thing I'll add is that notice how Dan tried to paint himself as some kind of saint by not competing against this barrel pick.
I'm the greatest friend alive.
Dan's a good dude. He looks out for Gold Eagle.
I do.
But I didn't get your barrel pick from the distillery yet.
You didn't ask for it, first
You're
of all.
such a good friend.
First of all, you didn't ask for it. Second of all, you haven't paid for it. Third of all, everything you asked me to get from the distillery, I get for you, and usually at a discult, such as
you owe me a sweatshirt, so bring
it's in my car. You'll see it on Friday.
Bring your pick with me, and I'll Venmo you.
You want one?
Yeah, I want one.
All right, I'll get one tomorrow. Yeah, no, I am a saint. I am a good friend. And I do look out for my friend Gold Eagle Jake and get him some of the most unique stuff we have that's not just unique, but flavorful. You're just a jerk and an asshole.
You don't
Jake.
look out for me. I get it.
No, you're. Why would I? Look behind you. You're doing just fine in the whiskey side of things. All right. Well, I guess, Jake, do you have anything else to talk? I mean, that's kind of about the barrel. We still what's funny is you're so close. We still haven't had you come out to just go sample barrels to do your next barrel pick. Maybe that's what we do next time for another barrel pick.
Yeah, we definitely should, especially with me being out west. I'm only like an hour away from the distillery. So
maybe that's how we'll do the next one is we'll just have you walk through and you can point to some barrels and we'll pull you a sample.
Sounds
and
good.
See if you like it or not.
Absolutely.
But
yeah, no,
unique.
I mean, I'm excited for this one.
You're invited, Jake. Jake R is
think-
not. You can come out for that. Jake can't. Jake's a jerk.
Jake's gonna pick me up and drive me, so I don't have to drive home.
Well, that's fine. If Jake's the driver, then he just can't drink. So
Jenna's going to drive us then.
I'm sure she'd be so happy to do that. Love you, Jenna.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only other thing I want to touch on is, it was last summer that the three of us went out there and we did the episode where we tried the toasted barrel pick at the different proof points and settled on the proof point we wanted. And Dan took us through the warehouses and sampled all kinds of secret stuff that I won't spoil. But there's a lot of really cool shit coming down the pipeline at Whiskey Acres. I think a decent chunk of it's going to possibly come out next year as long as everything goes
I see
well. Right?
we're debating if we release stuff at 4 years or we just wait and sit on it until it's 5 years old.
Oh, I mean,
because we want to start having all the bourbon be a minimum of 5.
Either way, I mean, there's a lot of exciting stuff coming down. It's reason to keep an eye out.
I mean, we talk about this all the time, but it's a reason to respect the journey of a distillery.
Yeah.
And appreciate a distillery that is making all these tweaks and changes and not rushing things, letting things age out. It's much more respect for that than buying MGP barrels and bottling them and putting a fancy label and bottle out to the market. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there's definitely a lot more respect to the smaller distillery that's really learning, making changes and improving every single batch and every single week that they're at the distillery.
Yeah. And to have the balls to say, you know what, we're going to deviate from our OG mash bill and try different things.
That's true. Yeah.
Because the problem is you never know how it's going to come out. And then you run into the issue of, for example, this bourbon with rye. Let's say it came out and did not taste good. Well, we can't blend it off into our bourbon because it's a wheated bourbon and now it's a 4-grain.
Right.
So you're kind of screwed on that front. You don't know how, so that's why this one only had 5 barrels. I think the next batch we did, which is just turned 4, I think we did like 20 barrels of. So there's a little more on that run.
And the yeast, the different yeast strains, you don't know you don't know at all what any of this is going to taste like.
Yeah.
So,
But,
props
especially
to
when you're basically given, everything by a total legend. Then you're like, maybe we should try something new. That's a pretty risky move. But I mean, it's clearly paying off. So it's cool to see that.
Yeah. Jake, you got anything else you want to add?
No, I don't think so. Like I said, hopefully this barrel's gone, but if there's still some there, then hopefully you listeners will pick one up and appreciate it as much as we do, because I really do believe it is one of my favorite picks of the year for sure.
And Jake, the good thing is if it goes super quick, there's another barrel that's still sitting in the same warehouse. Oh, that's the other
Dan's pick.
Well, no, because mine wasn't with rye. We can get you another barrel.
Well, you're the one that you wanted to pick, but you didn't want to compete with.
Right. Because I had 1251. I knew my barrel that the sample was 1251. You had 1250. So if it does sell super well, we can easily work that up. The other thing about this one too is it's not the first, but it's also one of the first barrels that has spent its entire life in the grain bin.
Oh yeah, nice.
So it's a grain bin barrel. If you don't know what that means and you haven't been out to see us, first of all, what's wrong with you? We're about an hour and a half away at max from most of you. Second of all, one of our warehouses is a grain bin.
Yeah.
Because we are on a farm and we had the grain bin we weren't using, so now it has whiskey in it.
Yeah, that's my favorite warehouse.
Yeah.
It's super cool.
Yeah, if you haven't gone to Whiskey Acres, you got to get out there.
Yeah.
Very cool hangout. Good cocktails, inexpensive cocktails because they're out in the middle of nowhere and close by a college town. And they usually have food trucks and live music on the weekend. So
we just had Cousins
sure
of Maine Lobster out last
trip.
week.
Ooh.
Yeah, if you're interested in getting this barrel pick, if it's still available, Jake can tell you where you can get it because it's only available at one place.
Gold Eagle, 255 Peterson Road in Libertyville, Illinois. goldeaglewine.com. Follow us on Instagram at Gold Eagle Wine, Facebook at Gold Eagle Spirits. And see our inventory, shop online for pickup shipping within Illinois. And throwing it back to you guys.
Jake, if people want to hear about the last barrel pick we did about proofing down or listen to the episode after we did the tasting, where can they do that at?
You can find that episode about a year ago if you want to listen to that one. And you can find that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can watch us on Spotify and YouTube. Follow us on Instagram at Bourbon Matters and Facebook. Also, check out Movie Matters. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Find us on all the same platforms. This month is October, so we've been watching John Carpenter movies all month. Those have been a lot of fun. Some of them are absolute classics, like The Thing. And then this week we watched Christine, which is a movie.
It is a movie.
So, listen to mine and my friend Kevin's takes on those movies on the Movie Matters podcast. If you're interested,
I'm going to drop everything I'm doing and going to go listen to Movie Matters now.
Question
great.
about the Movie Matters podcast, Jake.
What?
It's a question about the Movie Matters podcast.
Yeah.
Is it very similar with Kevin knowing everything and you having no idea what you're talking about, just like this podcast?
No, I actually know a lot about movies.
Okay.
Yeah, but
I actually know a lot about that subject.
I do. Yeah, Kevin does all the research. So,
oh, weird. You're not allowed to do research on that podcast either.
Well,
see a theme.
I do all the editing for both, so I think the trade-off is fair.
All right, boys. This is fun to talk about this. I'll work on another great barrel pick next time. But if it's not sold out, make sure to get this one quick.
Yeah, you're gonna hit a ceiling pretty soon because you're trying to one up each barrel, and
No, we won't hit a ceiling. There's going to be Oaxaca maca corn.
Hawken corn.
Just kidding. No,
we got 1,700 barrels stacked up that we need to get through, Jake. So
yeah, with
plenty
all
of
the
good stuff
different
out there.
barrels, these guys have different yeast and different mash bills, recipes, combinations, whatever you want to talk about, corn varietals. I'm sure we're going to find some unique things to release. And I think it's really cool and fun to kind of tie in the podcast with Whiskey Acres and Gold Eagle and do these special barrels. So Thank you, Dan. Thank you to all of our partnership.
It's a great partnership. You can do well for us. So
Thank you.
all right, boys.
all right, cheers,
All right.
guys.
Cheers.